What's up, Fox10 Fox here, and today we are talking about Gears 5 Hivebusters, the new expansion that just came out. The first part will be spoiler-free, the next part will not be, and I will go into spoilers talking about what I liked personally and disliked personally in the game. So this new DLC came out the day that I am actually making this review. That's a lie because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, so actually yesterday was when I played it with my dad, split screen on the Xbox One X. So I'm going to talk about 4 talking points in this video, and that is how I will review this. Number 1 is performance, which is 5 points. Number 2 is production, which is also 5 points. The story is going to be 10 points. The characters are going to be 10 points. Leaving us for a total score of 30, we'll divide that by 3, give the game out of 10. So starting off with performance, it ran exactly like you'd expect it to, which apparently nowadays is something of a feat. I was playing on the Xbox One X though. I don't know how it runs on the Xbox One, but I'm going to give this category a 5 out of 5 simply because it will run on any console or PC that you pick, and you should not expect any differences between playing that mode and campaign. Because I also played it on my PC, not all the way through, just to take a quick benchmark, and it ran at 60 FPS on a GTX 1080 at 1440p with everything on Ultra, which is the exact same result I get when I'm just playing the regular campaign. The music was typical of a Gears game. In Gears 1, the music was very strong. I also think that Gears 2 got a lot of it. Gears 3 was okay. Gears 4 had some strong pieces. The music is sort of a afterthought in a lot of these games, I think, and unless they are in iconic moments, and I think that's fine. The music shouldn't be like a main character in this game. So with that said, the music was good in some parts and negatable in others, in which you didn't really notice the music and the fact that you were playing this game. The music was so flat compared to everything else, but I also have that as a setting because one of the biggest problems that people have on TVs or soundbars is the fact that dialogue often gets overshadowed by the music and you can't hear what people are saying. When there was music that was impactful, it was fantastic. There was one scene in particular I'll talk about in spoilers that made you feel like an absolute badass. And it was just, it absolutely played very well with the emotions, and I almost think that that's what they were going for, was tying the music to the emotion in this game, as they often do with Gears of War. Graphical fidelity next, even on the Xbox One X, which isn't very powerful by today's standards, ran absolutely flawlessly, looks fantastic. It looks amazing. It rivals that of Cyberpunk and Red Dead Redemption 2, and nobody's talking about it. The character models leave a little bit to be desired, but at the same time, the environmental details are absolutely astonishing. I would even go as far to say that they look better in this DLC than they do in Gears 5. There was one thing, and maybe they will update this with the Series S and X, and hopefully it'll come to PC players, but that's a whole nother story for a different day. There was actually a scene where your character is walking through dark with beautiful lights like lanterns illuminating, and I actually thought for the first time in my entire career, this game could use ray tracing. Not because the lights were bad, but because they were so beautiful, I could only imagine just how amazing they would be with RTX. However, as I said, some of the character models kind of almost create a dissonance between the beautiful landscape and regular gameplay. The characters are sharp, and they have a lot of detail in their faces, but I don't think they have as much complexity as actual environmental details. Not to mention how out of place these characters already feel within the campaign. Lonnie fits in rather well. However, Mac and especially Keegan just look like dorks. Especially Keegan. I don't know what barber this man goes to have him shave the sides of his head only around, like no hair down here, only around, and then go bald up top. It is comical, and it's the only thing you're going to focus on when the character is on screen. Because, yes, although Gears of War takes very many creative liberties in terms of beefing up their characters, every character still is seated in a depth of realism. Keegan and Mac are not. But overall, the graphics, truthfully and honestly, are absolutely stunning, industry standard, just as Gears of War has always done. So with that said, I'm going to give production value a 4.5 out of 5. And I want you to know, as we go into story and plot, I am not a Gears of War fanboy that I used to be. I can walk into this review completely biased. However, I have a very much love-hate relationship with this game after Gears of War 4, so I do like to think that my reviews are pretty unbiased despite the fact that I do like Gears of War. I have the ability to call it out as it is, and you can watch plenty of my other videos in which I do so. So, the story next. The story was, it took me and my father about, I would say, 4 hours to 5 hours of game time. I wasn't keeping track. Most people, if you play it on intermediate or casual, will run through it in 3 hours or even less on casual. I played it on intermediate. No, not intermediate. I played it on the level above intermediate, whatever is the equivalent of hardcore in this game. And I'm going to be honest with you, some of my favorite parts were the toughest spots to get through. That's what makes them memorable, and that is probably 99% of the memories that I have in Gears of War playing in my entire past was these really hard moments that you got stuck at, ended up repeating dialogue, and all of a sudden that dialogue becomes an in-joke. And this one was no different. It had some pretty difficult spots. Some of the bosses left something to be desired, while other ones did hold up the candle pretty well. As is an unfortunate sort of thing with the Coalition, is that they never managed to make bosses memorable anymore. The main boss was only mentioned by name for most of the story. They try to have some build up at the beginning towards the main boss, however it really didn't land, especially because Gears 5 has become a bit outlandish, having the sort of threat looming over you. It's already such a common occurrence that the characters will prevail. So the build-up wasn't exactly there. It could have done a bit more. However, some of the bosses were very challenging. In terms of the actual story itself, I think it held up well for a DLC. These characters, which I will talk about in the character session, could not hold an entire story to themselves. The expositions there, you do get to learn about these characters, especially Lonnie. It sort of follows the Gears 5 tropes. However, you also do learn quite a bit about Mac. And you also do learn about Keegan as they search forth to find out how to enter these hives. And that's the entire point of the story. I don't consider this a spoiler, but, plug your ears for 5 seconds if you absolutely don't need to know anything. But the entire point of this Hivebusters DLC was to show how these characters became what they are now in the game in terms of escape characters, why they do the escape missions, how they do the escape missions, why they have all the fancy technology that they do to do these escape missions, why their armor looks different than normal, all that sort of stuff wrapped up in about a 3-hour story. I think that because of where this game takes place, and because of some of the characters' backstories, it could have actually done a lot more if it was given more time. I think one of the main reasons why they made this campaign was to show they didn't need Marcus at the helm. However, I think 99% of Gears of War players will look at this escape and go, oh my god, they touched on so many things within this universe that I wanted to see, and yet they never, ever actually dived into it. Instead, you are granted with a completely new story, which, although it holds up on its own, has about the same quality and polish of the Gears 5 campaign. I would rather play this DLC 7,000 times than play the Gears of War 4 campaign once. The writing is pretty good. It's not fantastic, but it is pretty good in some parts. In other parts, it does fall quite flat, and I'll talk about that later on in spoilers. Some of the lines in this game honestly reflect more of a cheesy teenage romance than they do Gears of War, and I will talk about that later on. And no, that's not a spoiler talking about the fact that any of these characters have romance. They do not. So it goes in depth about these new characters. It's very clear that they may want to make an actual story or spin-off one day with these characters, which I think, as long as it is seen as a spin-off, could actually do okay. However, for what this story is and how well it does, I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10. In summary, the entire story was actually pretty neatly packaged. You had an entire story that you got to play through. It was riveting and interesting throughout. Some of the dialogue was a little iffy, but I'll take that over Gears of War 4 any day. And it actually had purpose within the Gears of War universe, despite never really diving into the things that diehard Gears fans would want. A lot of collectibles give hints and cues as to where these people take place in the Gears universe, as well as where this city that they are located in, or town or island they are located in, has significance towards the Gears of War story. However, the collectible is the only real connection to the Gears of War franchise, and I think that had those collectibles been missions in this game, it would have been a lot better. But it gets an 8 out of 10 for me. Very solid. For $20, it's steep. I would have paid $20 because I'm a Gears fan. If you're a Gears fan, you should. But if not, either just get it on Game Pass like I did for Just get it on Game Pass for free. I mean, if you already have Game Pass Ultimate, it is completely free, and that's how I did it. I didn't have to spend $20. I don't know if it's worth $20 just because of how short it is. There are $20 games that are twice or 3 times as long, so use it at your own risk. And finally, before we talk about spoilers, is characters. Again, the characters fall flat in some regards, but it is a decent enough setup. After watching what was the truthfully abysmal Gears of War 4 campaign, in which they tried to set up 4 characters, had 16 hours worth of gameplay to do so, and completely fell flat, this was a breath of fresh air. These characters you actually do somewhat learn to care about. Now, if any of them dropped dead, I would be like, alright, whatever, I could give less of a shit. Because, again, I only had 3 hours to experience with these people. If I learned more about their backstory, which you do learn a lot about their backstory, to be fair, but perhaps if I were to actually learn or experience these events with them, it would make more sense, but that does not fit well in a 3-hour campaign. Starting off with Lonnie, she is the most important character in the game. Although you do learn a lot about Mac, and a little less about Keegan. Keegan is probably the least talked about character. Lonnie is by far the most important character. She's the driving force of the campaign. And for what she is, it's okay. I mean, she didn't stand out to me as an entirely amazing character. Somebody like Kate, who has such a rich backstory, in my opinion, I'm not going to lie to you, although nobody will ever hold a candle to Marcus Phoenix, I truthfully think that Kate is one of the best video game protagonists we've had in a while. And it's because of the history surrounding her. Lonnie has a lot of history surrounding her. A lot, and I'm sure you already know if you've looked at her last name, but I'll save that for spoilers later on. She is connected very heavily to one of the characters that we have seen back in previous Gears of War games, except she never ever touches on it, and it would have been a nice homage for Gears of War fans if she did. In fact, I think that this could have used a lot more of that character just because of how significant and how little you learned about this character in the past. If you got to learn more about them, I think that through this campaign, if you got to learn more about them, that would be amazing. Yet it was never really touched on, and the story itself is very much reliant on these sort of tropes in Gears of War. You have a set mission that's already told to you at the beginning of the game, and you're gonna go do it. So Lonnie, as a protagonist / plot driver, does a good enough job in doing so. The next most important character is Mac, and I'm going to tell you something. I don't know what it is with Gears of War and Redemption arcs, but somehow they managed to do it with me. Because I could not stand Mac. You know what? I still cannot stand Mac in multiplayer and Escape. His loud mouth is the most annoying thing I've ever heard. And although that loud mouth definitely does affect the gameplay sometimes and can get boring and very much dull, he does have some redemptive qualities to him. And in doing so, you at least get to learn more about him and care for him a little bit more. And finally, Keegan. Keegan was there. I think that out of everybody, he had the most interesting backstory they could have talked about. However, because they focused on Lonnie and the fact that Hivebusters takes place between Gears 4 and 5, they didn't want to. And I could see that being a DLC in the future for Keegan, talking about his backstory himself. In this game, he really doesn't push a whole lot of narrative. He doesn't talk a whole lot about his backstory. And he sort of is just there as a tertiary character, sort of like Dell is. Out of all 3, I can safely say he is the least interesting. So my rating for the characters, I'm going to give a 7. They're not perfect. Some of the dialogue is really cringe-inducing. But as their jobs as characters, I would genuinely be interested to learn more about them if they tone down Mac's personality and give Lonnie more of a character. So that is 24.5 out of 30. That is the final verdict, which is 8.1. So we're going to give it an 8 out of 10 is the average score, and I think that actually fits pretty well. It's not perfect, but it's really good. I would recommend you play it as a Gears of War fan. And now we will move into spoilers, and I want to say that I will be talking about other characters that do show up in this campaign right after this little spoiler message that's going on right now.
Well, it's about goddamn time.
All right, we're in the spoiler section, and I'm going to get right off the bat with the characters. Hoffman. He's not in it very much. I'd say he is in it for less than 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, it's interesting. You get to learn about Hoffman in a way that you never really learned about Hoffman before. As we all know, I think, if you've played Gears 1 through 3, you've seen Hoffman's transformation from the colonel who absolutely couldn't give less of a shit about Marcus and his intentions to actually caring about Marcus, the people that he was actually protecting, rather than just serving the cog. And this game absolutely takes it to another level in which he is no longer a part of the cog. He is wearing a Hawaiian shirt, and he is pretty much, this entire mission has gone rogue. Keegan doesn't know about that at all until about halfway through the campaign, where he says no more secrets, we're off book, sort of generic kind of things. And I'm going to talk about more of the generic and one of the biggest pieces of dialogue that really kind of fell flat for me. So the next character is Hannah Cole. Now, at first, she comes off as a bit abrasive. However, as the campaign goes on, she becomes more of a side character, which I think is what the intention was. She's a scientist. She's Cole's daughter, but she doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't want to talk about Thrashball. However, she actually is kind of proud of her father, which is pretty cool. However, it's obviously not something that she wants to talk about, and Keegan, Mac, and Lonnie all respect their wishes outside of what she decides to expose to them. She doesn't have many traits of Cole at all. She's not very outspoken. She talks about how Cole is a very different person in his personal life than he is on the battlefield. Obviously, I think Cole represents some people who force optimism in times of dire need, and it very much shows through because in this game, she says he's a very quiet man, which is pretty interesting, and he tells her about reading books and how important it is to read books, and that knowledge is going to win a war faster than any grunt with a gun could, and I actually do think that is pretty cool. I could definitely see Cole doing that. I could see Baird doing it more, but that would also be tropey because Baird is already a mechanic. She almost dies, but she doesn't, and I mean, to be completely honest with you, I thought she was going to die. The way they set it up was definitely she's going to die in this campaign, and she didn't, which was a surprise, and I'm really glad. That means Cole gets to see his daughter, and obviously his daughter's in the campaign, and hopefully will be in the campaign for Gears 6. However, she's with Hoffman as a form of protection. Because Cole's back in the war, she works with Hoffman on like science projects and things like that to keep her out of the face of war. And to be honest with you, it's not like Cole is forcing this character to stay out of war. She very clearly also doesn't really want to be in a war scenario, and she really isn't prepared to do so, and you can see that as she talks about it. But she does end up fighting with you in a few missions, almost dies, gets thrown up, and that's how you discover that the swarm can actually, like, they can get sucked into the Snatchers, and all of a sudden the Snatchers can carry them out and into the heart of the hive. That's the entire point, is she saw everything like Kate does, or like Marcus did in Gears of War 4, where she can see where she's going straight to the heart of the hive. That's how they find out to do escape missions. They develop a gas mask with a certain toxin, and then they go in. So those characters were okay. Hannah was interesting. I think that you could actually do a lot more with Hannah, and I think she could have been a more predominant character, and I'm not just saying that because she's Cole's daughter. In fact, that's kind of something that you forget about halfway through because it's not a huge... Again, she represents nothing of her father, but I do think that she's interesting. I think that she could maybe be like an advisor to Baird one day if she wants to continue with the science route. She's an interesting character, and although the game is very much shrouded by like plot armor in which she can kind of do whatever she wants, and the toxin magically forms with another toxin to make it safe for these people to go down and destroy the hive. But with that said, she is a good character. Talking more in depth about the story now. The main objective of the story is to find Lonnie's heritage, pretty much. She talked about her heritage quite a lot in this campaign, and it's all about finding, Wakatu, I think is its name. Wakatu is a bird that is passed down from history. It is legend. It's tropey. Because she's like, I never thought that I would see this in my history books. Yeah, or like, we used to think of this as legend, and now I'm fighting it. And that just seems like something that's been way overdone recently, but it was okay enough. That was not a boss that was very significant to me. In fact, it was rather tropey, like Gears of War often is. In Gears of War 4, you had to shoot some tentacles. And the thing has to get shot in the chest that opens back up. and you gotta kill this thing by doing some toxic fumes, which is super weird. But it's pretty much the exact same segmented boss fight that you usually fight in these campaigns anyway. So that was not a great boss fight. However, there are some. The Snatchers in particular kicked our ass because of one thing. The Snatchers in them of themselves, if you played Horde mode, really aren't that hard. But the problem is we were stuck in this tiny little area, and the Snatcher was right in the middle, and all of a sudden all of these juvies have to swarm around you. We actually died the most in that spot. We got stuck at that spot for probably about 40 minutes. However, like I said, the challenge isn't something that I actually dislike. I love challenges in video games. So despite the main story being about Lonnie's like whole mythology sort of thing and killing Wahatu, it also is about finding a way into one of the very first hives. Hoffman directly goes against Jin's order, which is why he's out of the cog, because he thinks that destroying this hive will stop them. However, obviously it doesn't, because these characters go on 400,000 different escape missions in the game. But with that said, it's an honorable thing for him to disbar for. But it doesn't have any significance because you never actually get to see the end of what happens with the escape map. I think that would have been a much better ending than the one that we got, where you kill the Talon, suck out its juice, and then all of a sudden they put on the green armor instead of their usual cog armor, and then go underground. I think it would have been much better to go underground in an escape-like mission and plant down a bomb and show you the significance of that certain bomb and why Hoffman went defective. And then comes the dialogue. And this was... The dialogue for like 90% of the game is pretty good. Then there are some parts where you may as well call a pig because this shit is ham-fisted. As I said in the review, there are some lines that are just like straight out of a teenage romance. Like it's a three-way bromance. Because there's the one scene that every fucking movie has to have, and I'm surprised Gears of War didn't have it sooner, was the whole... oh, well, we're defecting orders. I don't want to do this. Mac steps up and he says, well, I lost everything, so I'm going to stand up and do this. Lonnie says, I'm with you till the end. And then Keegan reluctantly says yes. It's pretty much the exact same thing you've seen in every other movie in your entire life. However, that same scene does talk more about Mac, which is kind of interesting. And it does lend better to the character than what you learn about him just through playing multiplayer and Escape. And actually, what's funny is you do get to hear about the fact that Delivery Driver Mac was one of the most hotly contested skins. In this game, he actually does talk about the fact that he was a delivery driver. We learned that his son died and he was too busy. He was miles away, probably doing his delivery driver job at the time. And he couldn't save his son in time. And he feels like a coward. He wants to die a hero's death. But of course, like in Alexander Hamilton, young men dying is easy, young men living is harder. And that's kind of the whole experience of what he talks about in this game as well. So the plot and the dialogue is very tropey, but it is executed in a way that it feels not the worst. It's not like it's done badly. Even though it's tropey, the tropes are done well. And you get to learn more about the characters. The coolest scene, one of the coolest scenes in the game, was definitely seeing them suit up in their escape armor for the first time, because you never really understand, and they didn't explain it really either as to why the armor shifts from cog armor to regular ones, other than the fact that these characters want a new armor because of what their current wearing armor represents. Oh god, what's her name? Why did I forget? Lonnie wears... oh god, she's in a certain group that was meant to, and this was really interesting, and I wish that they expanded on this more. She was pretty much meant to infiltrate locusts that survived the emulsion bombing, and this is actually where I thought Gears of War 4 was gonna go, was the emulsion bomb didn't kill all the locusts. Marcus had to come back and wipe them out. However, that was actually Lonnie's job. Although the public thought that all the locusts were dead from the emulsion bomb, Lonnie was one of the few people who actually did work and sweep the rest of the locusts out. In doing so, she ended up defecting one of the orders and killed one of her favorite COs, who was a good man, and she regrets it, which is why she wants to get rid of the armor. Keegan was an Onyx guard who wasn't really an Onyx guard because everything that was done when he was off on Azura working with Prescott pretty much went completely unlisted, and he's a corporal in this game. He's technically never been an Onyx guard in the eyes of the COG. And Mac just wants to prove himself because he lost his son. And the armor reminds him of a time in which he lost his son because he was a coward. So that's why they all changed out of the armor. However, there's no real significance as to why the armor is green or whatever. I think they just thought it looked cool or something. But you do get to learn about why the toxin bomb is the way it is, because it's actually a toxin from the Wahatu. And that Wahatu mixes well with a different one, and that's how they do it. The Wahatu they decide to keep alive because it is a mythological creature. So although the Wahatu gets absolutely fucked up, and I don't know how it survived considering we launched 4 million boom shots at it, they do decide to keep it alive, which I think is kind of cool because it is, like Keegan said, it's sort of restoring the natural order of things. So with that sort of mythological creature guiding them, it could be interesting to see where that goes in the future. The collectibles could have done better. Some of the collectibles were extremely interesting. A lot of them were pretty easy to find too. So I actually really liked the collectibles in this game. However, looking at them made me go, why aren't we playing this campaign instead that has all the cool stuff in it? Because for those of you who don't know, Lonnie is related to Ty. I'm not going to say daughter. I'm not completely sure about that. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not completely sure. I haven't watched that in a while. But she does have relation to Ty Kaliso. Never mentions him once. She may have died before he may have died before she lived long enough to see him. However, I think instead of it being her gran that teaches her everything, it would have been better if it was Ty, or at the very least she acknowledged Ty in some way. I think everybody was fucking getting edged by Coalition because of it. And I think that Lonnie had a lot more to offer than just being the stereotypical sort of like plot device mover because of that huge backstory she has behind her and what Pahanu means to her. Especially because Bernie was also on those islands as well. And I think that would have been a very nice gesture, especially if Bernie was still alive with Hoffman. But no, you really get a lot of surface level stuff in terms of the actual Gears of War lore. And they focus much more on just these characters. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like this video, I understand this is a very different format than what some people are used to and what they subscribe to. But I actually had a lot of fun. I'd like to do this for more games. So if it's something you'd be interested in, smash that like button, subscribe, do what you usually do, and as always, I got the hiccups. Buy yourself something nice.